25th September 2021. What follows is spoken without prejudice. I believe what I have to say in the following statement will, in my opinion, be important for the future of this country, both North and South, given as each day passes, we grow ever closer to a plebiscite on unification, especially in the wake of Brexit. Past 12 years, particularly the last 3, have revealed to me a lot about the inner workings of the Irish state and the impoverished state of our democracy, held together by a hegemony of powers and a disempowered people. The sheer cynicism by which power is maintained illustrates a deep contempt for the Irish people and its culture, and how little we have come since the days of empire. I intend to illustrate by my own experience the nature of Irish oppression and the way forward to a better future. Given the manner in which I am being abused and the complete lack of government support, speaking my mind is the only option I have left. Before I begin, let me add a caveat. It only takes a small number of corrupt government officials to bring the system to its knees. The question is how to prevent this. In order to truly understand what is going on in this country, you need to look beyond the superficial. Improvements in the areas of marriage and women's rights, while laudable, are, if allowed to become, smokescreens for an underbelly of corruption that has no moral compass and cares not for what changes are made, as long as they can maintain their criminal enterprise. Society is led to believe, if it becomes more progressive, it will in turn become less corrupt. That doesn't stand up to scrutiny. As the saying goes, follow the money. There is a pervasive attitude that one should know one's place and not upset the status quo. It seems as if old habits die hard. Judges in district courts take umbrage when an ordinary man or woman strikes back at whatever demonisation is placed upon him or her by the Garda. The idea that the individual has dignity and the right to expect civilised treatment causes the blood to boil in some of our politically appointed mollycoddle judiciary. Consumed by their own conceit and all-consuming belief, they hold the best interests of society in their hands. Their ears filled with years of nonsense by self-appointed guardians of the state. The fact that on Garda Siochana failed to live up to high standards of bookkeeping and adherence to the constitutional right of every individual to a fair investigation is completely lost on them. Hoisting a flag and shouting "Cry freedom" does not make for an independent state. Our forefathers fought for independence in order to be able to enjoy self-determination. One could argue breaking from the British Crown set back civil rights in this country by decades, as we failed to evolve under the new administration, as would have happened if we remained British. We gained our independence, but we did not gain our freedom. As long as the present situation continues, in essence, we do not have self-determination. We have a compliant society where those who are better off, generally speaking, are totally unaware of the manner in which the police force maintains control over the ordinary person. When you live with this knowledge, you are in effect oppressed, knowing you are unable to express yourself freely without fear of repercussion. Our courts and our police are unprofessional and a threat to the life and liberty of ordinary people. The linkage between oppression and power appears to seduce certain members of the force by the prospect of coexistence with those they seem rich and powerful. While the state struggled to find its feet after independence, the old guard already put in place its plans to maintain the status quo, except this time under a different flag. The manipulation of the masses has relied on misinformation, the spreading of lies among a gullible population suffering from low self-esteem after years of all kinds of abuse, division, petty corruption, and compromise sown by greed and gullibility. It's no wonder many a fool has been delighted to be taken into the confidence of anyone in an expensive suit. Every norm of decency we were brought up to practice has been manipulated and turned against us. Nothing is off bounds. It's completely godless evil practiced by sociopaths. I wager there is not a public works project in the country where organised crime dictate when and where the funds are to be spent. It's a cosy relationship that suits all concerned except the Irish people. If this were a proper functioning democracy, the bank bailouts would never have occurred. They were foisted upon us by subterfuge and deceit. So, how do we change these state of affairs? Not with the current form of laissez-faire government. We must squeeze tight the doors of opportunity that allow the clandestine and hidden forces play the purse strings of state like Nero playing his fiddle as Rome burns. We must not allow a state of affair that enabled special interests to foist hundreds of billions of euro debt upon the people, leading to a rise in fascism and social discontent to continue. We need a fully accountable democracy. We need to empower people through education and emotional awareness, not empower criminals lacking basic human decency. It was because of this gross deceit and abuse of Irish democracy and the impact it would have on generations to come, I entered politics on a platform of reform and transparency. At the end of the day, you either believe a country belongs to its citizens or you believe its citizens are simply fodder to keep the engine going, resulting in ongoing abuses of civil rights and deprivation of opportunity to grow. By doing nothing, we slowly slide down the pole of individual annihilation. I'm a simple man. I believe in the creative, destructive power of capitalism, much like the cycle of life, as a complementary force to the development of the individual, in an environment where the rights of the individual are sacrosanct and the needs of the vulnerable protected. The path to self-individuation is the right of all, as is the development of the soul, and should not be denied in the interest of the criminal few. We are no longer peasants to be kept in our place. We must rise to the challenge to make our mark on the world, rather than wait for whatever the world hands to us. When I was overseas witnessing civil unrest in far-flung countries, I asked myself in what way could I make a contribution to a world caught up in continuous strife. I realised I had the privilege of coming from a small country which had global reach, and I believed this gave me an opportunity to influence the world by influencing what happened at home. I believe we could set an example to other nations by our own good governance and respect for human rights. Coming home has made me realise that we lack this moral authority, and why. And if we do nothing to rectify matters, we will contribute to a worsening of the situation overseas by our own corruption and greed. I also realised, having given my allegiance to the Irish state and been utterly abused, a blind loyalty to an Irish identity is a death sentence for the soul and the individual. We need to be able to embrace our own culture, but most importantly, to be able to be open to the richness and diversity of other cultures, including our nearest neighbours. We have to learn to reach outside of ourselves. When I first ran for election in 2009, I was confronted by an inebriated individual coming out of Tennanty's pub in RD, who walked up to me looking very stern and stated, "You are a Garda informant." That was when I learned my first lesson in politics. Corrupt politicians spread lies, not directly but through their aides. Crooked politicians are always out of sight when the crime is committed. The irony was not lost on me. The absurdity that because I was protesting against corruption, I somehow was assisting the Gardaí to root it out, I find hilarious, and a clear reflection of the ignorance that exists in our society in relation to these matters. Having announced my candidacy in 2009, out for a walk one day, I met a man who warned me if I ran as an independent, I would be stabbed in the back. He said, "You need to be in a party." At this time, I was not interested in party politics. I was simply interested in reform and transparency. Little did I know how prophetic his words would be. He foresaw my second lesson in politics. An honest politician cannot run as an independent unless he has someone watching his back. How right he was. I went like a lamb to the slaughter. It perhaps explains why, in all the time I've run for office in Mid-Louth, not a single candidate has discussed corruption. It might also help to explain why all the individuals, the criminals I have met, give off an air of invincibility and walk around with great swagger. clearly indicating no fear whatsoever of the Garda Síochána or the government. The next lesson was probably the hardest. Those whom you think you can rely on when lies and deceit are spread stab you in the back when you least expect it to protect their own reputations. Intelligence is not a given. But I guess the most important lesson I learned and the most valuable was this. Just because you share the same views on corruption and the need for reform does not mean you share the same views on the importance of all peoples on the island of Ireland. It is because of these lessons that I no longer see how I can run as an independent candidate, and why I have chosen to give my support to those who have a clear policy on political reform I can support. At the end of the day, my concern is with the checks and balances that are out of kilter, allowing much suffering to take place due to the billions and billions of euros being squandered, which continue to be squandered due to criminal interference. By putting an end to this criminality, the question of how many houses are to be built, or what health services are to be provided, or what schools are to be provided, becomes academic. We then have the funds to take care of society's needs. We need a system with checks and balances, not one that relies on nods and winks, and certainly not one where judges are appointed by politicians. Hence why I focus on the causes of the problem, and not the problem itself. Whether we like to admit it or not, we were born into a tightly controlled society, where the individual is expected to know their place. And if you belong to lower economic classes, you do not have a chance in hell of achieving justice in our court system if you are innocent, and on Garda Síochána once you found guilty. From what I have witnessed, a poorly organised force is filled with loopholes for Gardaí to jump through in denying the right to a fair trial, through the proper collection of evidence and official documentation. When asked to produce documentation of the date allegations were made at the Garda station, which led to an arrest in one case I witnessed that occurred 1 year after the 2009 elections, the Garda stated it had not been written into the station logbook, and the judge chose to ignore this anomaly, which if proven would have shown the date on the statements to be incorrect. In addition, after the defendant requested a delay of several months while suffering the trauma of the process, several requests were made to Garda Síochána to supply phone records to disprove the claim. A call had been made on a certain date. Garda Síochána delayed responding until the date for which the records were available had lapsed, stating it was no longer possible to access them, thus making it impossible for the defendant to show in court the allegations were manufactured. In addition, despite recording equipment being installed for recording of court proceedings being available on the day of the trial, it was turned off, thus hiding what transpired in the courtroom. And this is all quite acceptable to the courts, who it seems work hand in glove with Garda Síochána when it suits. The same court silenced the defendant's representation when it seemed he was hitting out at the reputation of the injured party, when in fact he was simply trying to throw doubt on the content of the witness statements prepared by Garda Síochána. With blood popping out of his nostrils, the judge railroaded the case to its conclusion and threw the defendant into prison for the night. His first time ever, despite never having a single incident in his life with law enforcement. He chastised the barrister for the line of argument, and the barrister in turn later attacked the defendant on a pretext in order to vent his anger for being left embarrassed and sheepish in court. Coupled with 2 years of fighting the case in court with approximately 9 court visits, this left the defendant with serious PTSD and needing to go to bed for a minimum of 10 to 12 hours a night for several years to get enough sleep in order to function at work, while undergoing intensive trauma release therapy to deal with the PTSD. It drove the defendant to despair and suicidal thoughts while throwing his whole life into chaos. It is abundantly obvious from my experience the present judicial system of justice and policing is abused to suppress those who are a threat to the status quo or step out of line for certain special interests. Does anyone know anybody who has managed to bring a successful case against a single member of the force? If you do, it's the exception and not the rule. Everybody knows you cannot bring the Gardaí to account, and it is a given in Irish society that it's better to shut up and put up. Well, that is not good enough for a free society. If you ever find yourself in the unfortunate situation of being arrested on a pretext and wanting to prove the statement's false, Do not under any condition pass on any information that might prove your innocence to Garda Siochana. Despite a clause in the Constitution that obligates them to investigate both sides of a case in an even-handed fashion, the reality is, when they've made up their minds to prosecute, some will use your evidence to attack you. They know the game very well. It is their stagecraft. And be very careful who represents you, as many solicitors are in the back pockets of Garda Síochána, where one scratches the back of the other, giving favours and expecting favours in return. You might find yourself the unfortunate victim of subterfuge designed to meet the needs of Garda Síochána and not the needs of your own personal justice. In the case I referred to above, after over a year and a year and a half of numerous court appearances, the defendant had submitted significant documentation and arguments to the local superintendent, arguing why the case should not go ahead. The same arguments which were later used to twist the evidence in court. On this particular court appearance, the court clerk read out the case name, and before she had finished, the sergeant in charge of cases shot up like a flash. I was taken aback at how quickly he responded. It seemed he wanted to preempt anything happening. Immediately, with a firm and concise voice, he said, "The family have withdrawn the complaint." The judge asked him again, and he repeated, "The family have withdrawn the complaint." Then the solicitor for the defendant said, "Are you sure you have the right case?" The sergeant said in response, "Yes, the complaint has been withdrawn." The prosecuting Garda stood up with a perplexed look on his face. Then the solicitor said, "I'm not sure if that is right or not." Prosecuting Garda stood determinedly towards the sergeant, with his face flush, and the sergeant averted his gaze from the guard as if intimidated. The judge said gravely to the defendant's solicitor, "Surely this is to the benefit of your client." In response, the solicitor said, "In fairness, he must be referring to the wrong case." The court sergeant sheepishly agreed and looked crushed and embarrassed. He shuffled his case load as if he had mixed up the cases. He made to sit down while turning halfway to his left towards the defendant behind him, as if to apologise, and then turned back. The sergeant was visibly flushed and upset. The case lasted for over 2 years, from August 2010 to December 2012, and caused untold damage to all concerned. It could have ended 18 months earlier if the solicitor and guard in question were not in cahoots. One has to ask what kind of evil inflicts that much suffering on another human being, and what kind of fear prevents the good from stepping in to prevent it. There is so much unnecessary suffering in the world. Why are Gardaí allowed to wield their power in an effort to destroy people they choose to dislike? Where is the oversight to prevent this? Why are they not answerable to a commanding officer? And why does the courts not seek to resolve matters before they even enter court? What this illustrates is how little discipline there is in the force, and then how incestuous the relationship is between law enforcement and the legal system, not to mention how corrupt the legal profession is, and how little the judiciary intervene. Politics and the legal system are intertwined. The defendant is just a pawn in the game, intimidated by unscrupulous individuals, as they know they hold the power. It also shows how the force is a mixed bag, and how the good often do not stand in the way of the bad. The Garda should not have challenged the ruling, and the solicitor should not have lied. The judge should have insisted on the rights of the defendant, but did not. Despite all this, when the defendant went to another solicitor, the new solicitor did not feel empowered to do anything about the situation, as solicitors do not like to challenge law enforcement, as will go against them in the future. They are vulnerable to the whims of undisciplined Gardaí. I have met very decent officers who have given their lives to the force, so it pains me to have to write these things, as I know how disheartening it must be for them to be confronted by what is going on. That is why they need to be given the support that is necessary to enable them to make their positive mark on the force, not to be silenced by the bullies who are institutionally ingrained and safeguarded by the current system of administration. The same solicitor who spoke against his client in the dismissal of the case also held CCTV showing that statements given against the client to be unsafe. Later, after the defendant changed solicitor, said he did not have the CCTV, despite the fact that a man fitting his description collected the CCTV from the premise in question. In addition, the same prosecuting Garda had previously asked a judge that the defendant sign on 3 days a week at his local station, as he considered him a flight risk. The judge threw out this request when the defendant explained his responsibilities and, in any case, that he did not agree with the charge. With all of this in mind, do not be surprised if the investigating Garda poisons the state appointed solicitor, who is supposed to represent your interests, and prefers to join forces with Garda Siochana. Nor if you are political in any way, feeds false information to the newspapers, who in turn run and hide when you try to hold them to account and will not put forward your version of events. Corruption among solicitors is nothing new, nor is manipulation of the media. It is part of the ugly truth of justice and policing in Ireland. The circle of corruption is insidious and complete. The constitutional rights to a trial in due course of law and to fair procedures are found in Articles 38.1 and 40.3 of the Constitution of Ireland. Based on several High Court cases, the DPP drew up the following guidelines. The fact that evidence is not to be used or the prosecution does not justify its destruction or unavailability, or the destruction of notes or records about it. Where the evidence gives rise to a reasonable possibility of rebutting the prosecution case, it should be retained. Fairness is at the heart of our justice system, yet the courts allow Garda Síochána to practice blatantly cruel acts of unfairness with the aid of compliant solicitors, where victims are terrorised by members who apparently have lost all empathy for their fellow man, and place the lives of friends and family at risk without a thought, driven as they are by anger and the need to win. Despite a worthy constitution and worthy guidelines, the reality is the populace is manipulated with manipulation and held in place by the threat of judicial censure, from which they will not emerge victorious if a decision has been made to censor them, despite their innocence. That is why I say the Irish people live in a state of oppression, particularly those of a certain socio-economic class. The lack of organisation and discipline is the means by which the force is able to maintain control. Poor record keeping means no embarrassing moments of truth in court. A lax command structure means the freedom to act off the books in the interest of whoever comes calling. For citizens without economic security, their ability to speak out is muted. Simply put, the ordinary person cannot defend him or herself against any corrupt action on the part of a member of the force, as the ease by which members of the force can influence solicitors on a quid pro quo basis is all too easy. You help me with this poor sod and I'll help you with that high flyer. In addition, untruths are passed to the press to further undermine the defendant. It is not a leap of the imagination to visualise judges having their ears filled with slanderous untruths. The system is rotten, reinforced by organised crime who have their tentacles in every organ of the state, which enables them to intimidate and harass any individual who threatens their hold and power. That is my personal experience. From the time I ran for election on a platform of reform and transparency in 2009 for Louth County Council and brought allegations of election fraud, as well as wrote a detailed analytical letter to the President clearly showing the government's arguments for the establishment of NAMA to be false, and had a letter on the subject published in the Sunday Business Post, not to mention other letters written to newspapers and constituents, I have been subjected to ongoing relentless harassment of one kind or another, and have experienced heightened trauma, corruption, fear and anxiety. In 2009, I stood on the main street of my town with a megaphone and cried out to the passing crowds that NAMA was unconstitutional and that it was corrupt legislation. One can say that we get the political representation we deserve, but is that entirely true? When I ran for election to Louth County Council in 2009, I noticed certain anomalies in the election process. I reported and documented my suspicions of election fraud in the Louth County Council elections to Garda Síochána. After the third count in 2009, the ballot papers were recalled due to papers from one election area appearing in the election boxes of another area 12 miles away. We were told the count had been stopped and so went home for the night. When I returned in the morning, the count had been completed. It was conducted during the night. The election results made a dramatic turn after the recall. Since this time, my life has been a living hell. Is it a coincidence that the incidents of the past 3 years began with a visit by 3 men two men, with the demeanour of plainclothes detectives on the 27th of December 2018, as I was alone in the Turkish sauna at Feld in Dundalk, where, months later, I received a death threat prior to making my first in-person report to Garda Siochana to launch the investigation, as my phone was being intercepted, giving advanced knowledge of my intentions. During this visit, the following transpired. Encountered with unidentified individuals, excerpts from incidents December 2018 to June 2019. On Sunday the 27th of December 2018, I left my home and drove approximately 10 miles to the private leisure centre I regularly frequent in the neighbouring town of Dundalk, where I swim and relax in the Turkish bath. It was the day after Boxing Day and very quiet. At that time, I had a routine of entering the Turkish bath prior to swimming. While in the Turkish bath, at one point, there was a man sitting in the corner to my left and a man sitting next to the door to my right. My recollection is they were present when I entered. The man in the corner then mentioned Brisbane and quoted from my book Amazing Grace by Lee Albert, my pen name, where I said life was easier then. He made a few more comments. I did not engage as I was keeping to myself, but was surprised by the similarity of his comments and my own writings. The same man started to talk about drinking and the need to detoxify. The man next to me talked about being in London. I too spent a lot of time in London. That is when I first encountered ibogaine. The man in the corner left and I spoke to the man next to me to give him some herbal advice for his liver. I recently qualified as a nutritionist in September 2018 and later as a naturopath in September 2019. I gave him the name of the herb and he said, "Yes, I think I've heard of that." I thought his response strange. As he got up to leave, he told me he was an actor and then departed immediately. I thought that to be unusual. The following day, a car parked obstructing my back gate, a Ford Mondeo 08 LH 12607. When I rang the Garda to have it removed, once I gave the registration, the Garda demanded to know who I was. Was this a warning shot that I should not run in the upcoming county elections in May 2019, 5 months later? I decided after this meeting to run, whereas before I had not intended to. But as I was clearly being challenged and needed to empower myself, I felt obliged to respond, especially as the incidents of harassment and intimidation started to occur with frequency and urgency from that date. In the previous year, I had experienced interference in the purchase of the family home in obtaining the deeds, which required high-level intervention after months by the bank to resolve. It threatened to scupper my financial arrangements and defied all reasoning. I realised that this was no coincidence and was not something I could run from, as it would always find me. Since that visit to Felda over the past 3 years, I have documented numerous incidents. In 2019 alone, I documented approximately 60 incidents, including the face-to-face sit-down with a gang boss where I was given a death threat. Many of those incidents covered a multitude of occurrences as I classified them under one heading, such as interference with my iPhone. iPhone interference took place on a nearly daily basis, with my iPhone being completely interfered with in all manners of ways, which I documented. My iPhone, by the way, went missing on a flight with Ryanair in early 2019 and took an unusual amount of time to be returned. I believe it was taken deliberately on that flight. Other incidents included clear evidence of interference with my motor vehicle, iMac, Chromebook, stolen property, break-ins, interference with my websites, Facebook, home broadband, hotel visits, and so on and on, all of which were reported to Garda Siochana, whose only response has been, until the 11th of September 2021, these incidents are just allegations. Either Garda Síochána do not have the competence or manpower to investigate, or I do not count as worthy of assistance. The number of incidents have not abated, and since my last correspondence with the Minister of Justice have continued, as if trying to drive home the fact I cannot turn to anyone for help, and that I will be crushed eventually. In my correspondence to the Minister and on Garda Síochána, I documented 2 major leaks on my property, which were clearly malicious, and the setting up of a website deemed malicious by Windows. On the same day, I received a message with a link to this website on my mobile phone stating my bank cards had been blocked and I should click on the link, only minutes after my cards were declined. It turned out the bank had not blocked my cards, but I was still unable to use them. When I checked the link, I found the site had been set up that very day, and some hours after checking the link, it was taken down. On Garda Siochana are fully aware of all these incidents. What is notable is that while I was writing to GSOC, I did not receive a death threat. But the minute I made it known I intended to speak with Garda Siochana, I did. Since making my first written contact with Garda Siochana in October 2019, I have had one interview where the interviewing officer balked when I offered to identify individuals. And apart from asking me what motive there might be for these attacks, the only real question I was asked was if I intended to stay in the area, in a manner which made me feel as if I was an outsider, simply causing problems, disturbing the status quo. One would imagine, as I did, the individual has recourse to their political representatives to deal with institutions which do not fairly represent them. But as the correspondence I've had for the past 3 years has shown to me, the Ministry of Justice and Equality washed their hands completely of anything to do with Garda Síochána. This is based on the premise that all criminal acts are investigated solely by Garda Síochána, and that they should be independent in carrying out their function. In the case where a criminal act is carried out by someone who is a member of Garda Síochána, the citizen has recourse to GSOC. Well, the fallacy of this arrangement is that, in my experience, GSOC do their utmost to not investigate crime within the force. I have had calls to ask GSOC on 2 occasions for help with Garda Síochána. Despite being traumatized on the first occasion in 2010, the response I got from GSOC was the matter was not important enough to investigate. Now, despite countless instances of intimidation beginning in force since December 2018, but in flow prior to that, and having supplied a vehicle registration number, Ford Mondeo 08LH12607, rammed sideways by my gate to block me in, the response I got on the 28th of February 2020 after waiting 8 months was, in my opinion, pure sophistry. In other words, the clever but false arguments, especially with the intention of deceiving. As follows. I am directed by Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission GSOC to advise you that your complaint, which was received on the 24th of July 2019, is inadmissible on the grounds that the behaviour alleged is not of such a nature that it would, if proved, amount to a breach of Garda discipline, as provided for in Schedule 5 of the Garda Act 2005, as amended the Act. Your submissions to this office do not describe any contact with members of Garda Síochána which might amount to misconduct, or any basis for an allegation that members of Garda Síochána have directed actions that might amount to misconduct. In accordance with Section 88(1)(c) of the Act, GSOC will take no further action in relation to this complaint. The Garda Commissioner will be notified of this decision. In other words, as I could not identify the individuals involved, they could not be members of the force, nor could the instance occurring to me have any connection to the force, despite circumstantial evidence. I have offered more than once to identify individuals, but each time I've been stonewalled. To be honest, the second time was really a test of Garda Síochána, as I have no interest in dealing with gangsters. I don't need to identify them. I think it would be safe to assume they already know who they are. Combining my experiences with GSOC on Garda Síochána and the Ministry of Justice and Equality, I have come to the conclusion that the Ministry of Justice and Equality is little more than a firm of accountants, divvying out funds to law enforcement agencies. It is probably one of the most toothless ministries in the government. GSOC are, in my experience, completely compromised and pose little or no threat to Garda Síochána. That is why the criminals carrying out these acts have acted with impunity, as they know the government is impotent to act, and that GSOC will not intervene unless its back is to the wall. The real power is with Garda Síochána, which operates in divisions akin to medieval fiefdoms, giving all concerned the cover they need to go undetected. How else can you explain pockets of criminality within the force around the country, and the indifference to censure of law and order displayed by certain criminal elements? Essentially, Garda Síochána are untouchable, poorly organised and unaccountable. Our Minister of Justice in reality is little more than a chief financial officer in relation to Garda Síochána, with little or no impact on the daily lives of ordinary people. This status quo of individual powerlessness in relation to law enforcement pervades our society and is commonly accepted as a matter of fact. This gives rise to a culturally ingrained attitude of impotence, an inability to determine one's own destiny. There is a reason why law enforcement and government are separate, to prevent exploitation by politicians. However, if law enforcement itself cannot be trusted, then who do we turn to rectify the problem? GSOC? I think not. Let me preface all this by saying there are many good committed Gardaí frustrated by the situation, but they are in no position to speak out. Fortunately, I've been able over the past 3 years to secure my property, such that the number of intrusions have reduced. However, there's not a month goes by, or sometimes a week, or sometimes on a daily basis, when I see evidence that someone has been in my home. The main source of frustration I now have is in the digital realm, and when I'm travelling abroad. There's nothing I can do to prevent harassment overseas, but I can direct investigations towards cybercrime here in the Republic. Yet this is the area on Garda Siochana do not wish to intervene. To give you some idea of the history of my dealings with authorities on this matter, let me state the following. I have corresponded with law enforcement officials 9 times, starting on the 28th of October 2019 until 31st of August 2021. That is the local Garda Síochána. I received 1 letter of response to my initial letter and had 1 follow-on interview in November 2019. I corresponded with GSOC 5 times, commencing the 21st July 2019 until the 18th of August 2019. I received a final response on the 28th of March 2020. I corresponded with my local politician twice on the 7th of April 2021 and the 15th of March 2021 and received no response whatsoever. I corresponded with Leo Varadkar on the 30th of December 2019 and was directed to the Ministry of Justice. I corresponded with the Ministry of Justice on the 24th of October 2020 and the 31st of October 2021 with a follow-up letter on the 2nd of September 2021. I've had no contact with Garda Síochána since my initial interview, except a call I received in May 2021 when the sergeant stated the Gardaí were prepared to investigate a single criminal incident, referring to my documentation as allegations. I then wrote suggesting what to investigate, namely Vodafone and the car parked outside my gate. I've heard nothing since that time, until after I sent the most recent updated documentation to the Minister and a copy to Garda Síochána at the end of August 2021. In this documentation I outlined all documented incidents to date, along with all correspondence on the matter. I pointed out the problem could not be fixed until it was first recognised by Garda Síochána. In a subsequent letter to the Minister I pointed out, today, Thursday the 2nd of September, some few days since my last visit to the Garda station earlier in the week, I went again to the station to hand in a copy of the documentation I sent you on USB and spoke with Garda Aidan Foy, LH115, who informed me the investigating officer had now been reassigned to Drogheda District Office. I have once again asked that he make contact with me. At the time of my last communication with Superintendent O'Connell in April 2021, I was informed he had also left the station. This means, as I write, there is, to my knowledge, no one in RD investigating this matter and no one in contact with me. Subsequent to this letter and a post on Facebook emphasising the need for this problem to be recognised by Garda Síochána, I received a call on the 11th of September from the investigating sergeant who put me on speakerphone. He explained he had received my documentation and was not currently based in RD. He asked me about the instance I had printed out, referring with some knowledge to their contents. This filled me with a sense of hope. Perhaps now the matter was being addressed and resources would be allocated to deal with it. I explained once more what was written in the documents regarding interference in my business affairs, where people texted me in relation to assisting me with my business were having their text blocked, despite 3 attempts each at texting me. I had sent photos of each person's phone logs. While talking on the phone, a video from Facebook started playing, distracting me. This has never happened before. He then asked me if I knew why these incidents might be happening. I said I believed it had something to do with the elections of 2009 and the report I made regarding election fraud. He then mentioned that I was having some other problems, and I said yes, and described a few minor details. He seemed interested. I felt he was seriously starting to investigate. He asked me if I knew who might be doing this. I said perhaps it's somebody related to my campaign on corruption in the county council. I described to him the people I encountered when I received my first death threat in Felda. He had no interest in this information. He discussed the interference with my iPhone and PC, and he suggested that I try a different provider. I explained I had already switched providers back and forth several times, but the problem just shifted. He said that I should contact the provider. I said I had already contacted the provider, and they did not respond. I asked him if Garda Siochana could contact Vodafone to see if a third party had been given access to my accounts. He said that was very unlikely, as it would have to be a law enforcement agency, and I would not be on any law enforcement agency watch list. I suggested to him that the Garda contact Vodafone and asked them to monitor my broadband and mobile to see if something is happening. He said that Vodafone were difficult to contact, basically ignored my request. He again suggested I consider changing providers. He said it's very difficult to investigate incidents with the passage of time. I said, how am I supposed to continue with my life with these events occurring in my business and private life on an almost daily basis? He said the next time something happens to contact the station immediately. He finished the call by repeating that I should get in contact with Vodafone or I should change my provider and see if the problem continues or not. That was all he was able to say to me. After this conversation, I was left dazed as my mind moved from believing for a moment Garda Siochana were going to investigate to the realization that the call was little more than a political stunt to buy time while this matter trundled on, as if waiting for it to come to its own natural conclusion. I've had time to consider the implications of this call, and I think it speaks volumes about what is taking place. Garda Siochana are not interested in investigating what is going on. Despite the large variety of incidents over a period of 3 years and the gravity of the motives I have documented, they appear unable to investigate anything and unwilling, doing what they can to avoid contact with me. Given the large number of leads, if they had the slightest inkling to investigate the matter, they would have done so. Instead, they have done nothing. They appear to have no intention of revealing what is going on. If this is a question of competence, then we as a society are in trouble, as most crime nowadays is moving into cyberspace, and Garda Siochana appear unable to investigate it. This makes our law enforcement agencies inept and useless for the 21st century. If this is true, and our intelligence agencies cannot investigate what is taking place, given the sophistication of these attacks and the constant 24-hour monitoring, one has to ask, are these cyber attacks being carried out by actors within the state, or does the Irish government have agreements in place with organisations such as the NSA to do its dirty work? Are foreign governments being used by the Irish government to spy and harass Irish citizens? Considering the hundreds of billions of dollars in debt and the massive flow of capital through Ireland from US corporations on an annual basis, it would not be absurd to imagine agreements put in place to safeguard US interests as identified by Irish authorities. Of course, hypothetically speaking, one could premise that in fact the reason Garda Siochana do not wish to engage with Vodafone is because they realise it's likely they will find members of the force engaged in these activities. If that is the case, then one has to ask, are these members acting at the behest of organised crime or at the behest of government? Perhaps at the behest of both. Perhaps there is a cosy relationship between organised crime and government, and I am simply a problem to be taken care of. There is no point in contacting Garda Siochana once the next instance happens, as I already gave them an abundance of incidents that have occurred only recently, and none of them, it appears, are suitable for investigation. And how exactly would they investigate these incidents if I say reported an incident within 60 minutes of it occurring? Would it not simply be an exercise in mockery to have me do so? Given the hundreds of incidents that have occurred in all manner of ways, and the fact that Garda Siochana feel unable to investigate indicates one of two things. Either they are incompetent and only fit for signing forms, or else they have no interest whatsoever to investigate. Neither conclusion is reassuring to the general public. I find myself coming to some sad conclusions, which I will allow you to deduce for yourselves. Whatever the case may be, I have no doubt I'm being terrorised and abused at the taxpayer's expense. And the only crime I have committed is to try and root out corruption. Is corruption so all-pervasive in our society that those with a totally cynical attitude simply live at the expense of others? If you are happy to live in this kind of society, then go on voting as you normally do. Nothing is bound to change. If, on the other hand, you are not, then the time has come to bring in legislation that reforms not only GSOC and on Garda Siochana and the judiciary in line with best practices worldwide, but also reforms politics to bring an end to the decadent manner in which politics is conducted in this country. As things stand, we are a political backwater, in my opinion. The envy and begrudgery that people complain from time to time about Ireland is institutionalised in these power structures and sends a message to every lowlife in the country. If you side with me, I will watch your back. I grew up in a border county, fully aware of the troubles on my doorstep. I've spent 5 years working in Belfast and know full well the sensitivity many feel towards their British identity. I've also spent many more years working in the UK, having lived in London and Brighton. So the question of Irish unity is one that is dear to my heart, as I believe a united Ireland should be handled in a manner that enhances our relationship to the UK and not undermines it. It should also not bring about social unrest on either side of the present border, which is why, in conclusion, I would like to add, if we are serious about a united Ireland, we need to get our house in order, and we need to be pragmatic. You can't invite somebody into your home and then hold them prisoner. Having a plebiscite does not make for united Ireland, nor does appointing Drew Harris, formerly Deputy Chief Constable of the PSNI, make on Garda Síochána equivalent to the PSNI, even if it is a step forward. Northern Ireland already fought for its civil rights. We can't expect them to fight for them again. I believe it will take years to resolve the problems within our law enforcement agency and government, and many more years before North and South are comfortable working within the same political framework. For these reasons, along with the need to guarantee the safety and cultural heritage of Northern loyalists, I believe the best step forward is as a federal republic, whereby we continue with the Dáil and the Northern Assembly and replace the Seanad with an all-Ireland governing body. I also believe we should consider rejoining the Commonwealth as an act of good neighbourliness, inclusiveness, and an indication of our outward-looking stance, and also to avail of the benefits this would bring to Irish society as a whole. We cannot afford to be backward in our thinking if we intend to move forward. Indeed, a united Ireland might be one way to break up the stranglehold of justice and policing through monitoring best practices in both regions by an independent all-Ireland body. While these are difficult times, they are also exciting times for Ireland as a whole. Yes, the world is going through tremendous change where advances in technology threaten the civil rights of individuals, but it's also a two-edged sword, which, as we have seen, has brought the attention of the world through Facebook to the infringement of people's liberties, and which in my own case has allowed me to reach out to you despite my political website being interfered with, preventing me to make textual updates to my web pages. In the end, I believe the best in man will be victorious, but we must be vigilant and play our part for a better society for all. In conclusion, I would like to add, the experiences I write about have changed me for the better. I am not the same man. I am someone I can now look in the face and respect. For this I am very grateful. However, the time has come for these incidents to stop. They no longer serve any purpose. They have taught us all we need to know. With that, I would like to thank you for listening to me and to wish you and yours safe passage through these difficult times. Thank you.